fact, it has caused me to muster up all of my transcendental consciousness because of the frustrations and aggravations. But anyway, let's get started here. Om Gana Timarandasya Gana Gana Salakya Chaksurun Meritam Yana Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yana Bhutare Sayam Rupakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Vande Hum Sri Guru Siyata Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sidevam Sadvaitam Sapadutam Parejana Sayitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Ladita Shivisikan Vitam Sya Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Cheva Narottamam Devam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jyotirayat Nashta Prayashu Badresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Dhamashoki Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Nigamaka Padagaram Param Shukamakaram Ritavitravi Savitam Pivata Bhagatam Rashamariam Mohora Hora Sikabubi Bhavakaha Namaha Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tanama Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesa Sanivari Praskata Desarani Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Brinda. Yeah, there is a story here. You're right about that. 8 minutes late, and what an 8 minutes it was. I got here 7:15 with a good 15 minutes to set up. And in the back of your head, you always know that as wonderful as technology is, when it goes south, it goes south. See, so as you know, I've been going through Zoom recently. Go on Zoom, and then through Zoom, you can go on Facebook Live. So I clicked Facebook Live, and I logged in, and it says preparing to open Facebook Live, preparing. 2 minutes go by, 4 minutes go by, 5 minutes go by. It's like 7:30, 7:31, 7:32, and I just have this blank screen. Facebook Live, preparing. So I realized that Facebook Live is not going to come up. I refreshed the screen, I closed it, and reopened it. So then finally, after it was obvious that we're not going to be able to go through Zoom to Facebook Live, then I'm just set up my phone here on the little stand and figured better late than never. So I assumed that all those fireworks in the beginning from Anjali and others are like congratulating me, I hope, for my persistence. Good morning, Stephen. And of course, Anjali has been here with her fireworks. Rakesh, thank you all for your patience. Jimmy, Vaibhavi, Jean, Terry, Malini, Preeti. I think it's evening over there in Malaysia. All right, thank you all for joining me. Thank you for the emojis. I feel I actually deserve an emoji or two for what I've been through for the last 10 minutes. Who would ever imagine that Facebook Live wouldn't come up? And I have some more news for you as well. It is not only is it Transcendental Tuesday, but it is Unusual Tuesday because it is something that we haven't done before. At the end of yesterday's class, which was on the 38th verse, 3rd chapter, 1st canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, there was so much. After 3 full 40-minute sessions, and one session last week, I think the Wednesday session was almost an hour. There's still more to say. Is it surprising? Nigama kapaturu garitam phalam. Is it surprising that this most mature, most ripened, most relishable, most juicy fruit of the Vedas should have an inexhaustible supply of inspiration and topics which we can churn between ourselves back and forth? So believe it or not, unprecedentedly, this will be the 4th day on the 38th verse. And I'm not even going to read the verse again. I'm assuming that you've all got it memorized by now. But where we left off yesterday was the unfavorable devotional service of Kamsa. And Prabhupada points out that the main difference between favorable and unfavorable devotional service is that those who do favorable devotional service are happy. They're Krishna conscious and they're happy. And those who do unfavorable devotional service, and there's some nice happy heart emojis going up there, like Kamsa. Kamsa was always absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, whether he was sitting, sleeping, doing his morning ablutions. Wherever he was always unhappy because he positioned himself as an enemy to Krishna, which is not a good place to be. Madhvayat Bhativatyam Suristapati Bhatra. The sun rises and sets out of fear of Krishna. The seasons change out of fear of Krishna. The planets and suns keep on their orbits and don't crash into each other out of fear of Krishna. And so Kamsa's Kamsa's antagonistic viewpoint towards Krishna was not obviously going to make him happy. It was just going to fill him full of fear and anxiety. He was Krishna conscious, but he was far from being unhappy. He was simply waiting for that moment that Krishna is going to come to kill him. Example is often given as that of the cat. At one point in time, the cat may have a kitten in its mouth, and the kitten just feels love. The kitten's fully conscious of being in the mouth of the cat, and yet that consciousness does not cause any anxiety or any stress. Doesn't cause the kitten's blood pressure to rise, its cholesterol to thicken up. Just the opposite. The thought of the kitten who cannot protect herself from the environment, who's weak and awkward and blinded, is so much consoled and comforted by the thought that the kitten is in the mouth of the cat. It's a source of comfort, joy, peace, happiness. But the rat in the mouth of the same cat has a totally different experience. Yeah, his blood pressure is going up. His anxiety is rising. He's thinking of the cat 100%, just like the kitten was thinking of the cat, but he's thinking of the cat in a different way, that here comes cruel death, the teeth biting and tightening, vice-like around my neck, ultimately going to snap my neck and take my life. Kamsa was like the rat in the mouth of the cat named Krishna. And devotees who favorably do devotional service are like the kittens who are sheltering under the protection of the Lord. And we have the example here of those who did the most favorable devotional service to the Lord, the 6 principal disciples of Lord Chaitanya, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. They did such favorable service to the Lord that 2 of them at least, Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, were big ministers in the government of Bengal at that time. We all know that about that time, Christopher Columbus set off for the Orient to find a sea route to the spices and the riches and the treasures of India. And of all the provinces of India, India was the richest country in the world. Marco Polo also confirmed this. But of all the provinces in India, Bengal, which was formerly called Magadha, was the richest province in India. It had a port, Calcutta Port, and you had the East India Trading Company, which was the portal by which all trade came and went from India. Fabulous wealth was settled in Bengal, and Rupa and Sanatana Goswami were the ministers of the local Muslim leader there, king or magistrate. And the Muslim himself didn't care for affairs of state. He was just always off on rides and excursions and weekend trips with his friends. He didn't even basically ask Rupa and Sanatan to give accountings of their doings. They had a free hand to minister the government of Bengal. And yet it is said of them in the Sad Goswami Astakam, 8 verses, praising the favorable devotional service of the 6 principal disciples of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Chakvaturnam Ashesha Mandalapati Srenim Sadam Tushavat Bukba Dina Ganeshako Kurunaya Kaupina Kantastrito. Because of their great compassion for the poor, fallen souls of this world who are suffering in the ocean of birth, death, disease, and old age, the Goswamis, even though they were managing an entire province, thousands and tens of thousands of people, it was due to their good management those people's lives were peaceful, controlled, harmonious. And it's presumed that when people's lives are peaceful, they're able to execute their religious principles, live righteously and happily, and move step by step back to home, back to Godhead. But they wanted to expand the field of their activities even more, and they didn't want to be under the accountable in any way, shape, or form to the Muslim government. And so in order to get out what Prabhupada would call into the open field, you remember the parallel situation of Prabhupada being in Jhansi and having a society, a fledgling society called the League of Devotees. He made one disciple, he had meetings, and more people were coming. He just started to get a measure of success when the rug was pulled out from underneath him. And he says that was Krishna's mercy, because Krishna did not want Prabhupada to be in that limited environment. Prabhupada said, Krishna wanted me in the open field. I was getting leverage out of Jhansi, was part of Krishna's plan. We just celebrated Ram Vijayashami also on Sunday, and it was also part of Krishna's plan to leverage Ram out of Ayodhya so that he could go south for 14 years and take care of a big plague that was happening in the south. It took the form of the Asuras and the cannibals and the demons there. And then he returned to Ayodhya to resume. Similarly, the Goswamis were in a limited environment, being employees of the Muslims. So according to the call, which they had received from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to write books and excavate the holy places of pilgrimage in Vrindavan, which was far to the west of Bengal, they gave up their exalted positions as ministers and took vows as mendicants, from wearing opulent robes of silk and velvet, turbans, living in palatial circumstances with presumably wives and family. They gave it all up without, and what they got in exchange was not even a fixed place to stay, not even clothes to cover 90% of their body. They simply wore loincloths. They had begging bowls to take care of their nutritional needs. And they did all of this out of affection for fallen conditioned souls, just like a father will make sacrifices out of affection for his children. And you'll never give up anything for Krishna's sake, but that Krishna will not reward you richly. Krishna will compensate. And anyas chintayantu mam yejana tesham nityavya. I will preserve what you have, and I will supply what you lack. The Goswamis were charged with excavating the places of pilgrimage which have been lost, covered over by jungle, as well as writing books. So for the superior insight, it almost took a heightened sense of instinct and intuition for them to comb the scriptures and then to discern where were the pastimes of Krishna in all of the overgrowth and jungle. It was an extraordinary, extrasensory facility which had to be awakened in order for them to fulfill the order of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to excavate the places of pilgrimage. And then, of course, writing books always requires an awakened and astute intellect. And it just so happened that once they leveraged themselves out of family life, reduced their needs, eating and sleeping, almost to nil, housing was not a concern. They would live under a different tree every night. One story is that one of the Goswamis used to find crocodile holes and sleep in the crocodile holes at night. And they simply took their sustenance from whatever they could get donated through begging. So as a result of reducing family connections, wife, children, business concerns, the result was Urva Reta Shaha. It says that when one becomes celibate, detached, removed from family concerns, then the result is that instead of wasting or spilling the valuable semen that one has, which is the richest of all the different fluids within one's body. Often they have this bone marrow transplant procedure, which can bring people back sometimes from the very edge of death. And the bone marrow is created from the semen, which is even richer and more valuable than the marrow of the bones itself. Consider that it is semen injected into the womb of the female that magically and mystically it has the potency to transform itself into the body of a living being. That great, valuable, rich fluid should never just be spilled for no practical purpose. If one is a householder, one should be continent as much as possible and use the Recitation semen for the propagation of children. But how? But once leaving that behind, then retaining that rich substance, those rich secretions, they go up instead of going out. They go up into the brain, and the result is that one develops finer tissues within the brain. The result is that the brain is incredibly and inestimably enriched, especially in the matter of memory. So being detached, living a simple life, retaining the semen, the Goswamis wrote hundreds were able to successfully execute the places of pilgrimage. In connection with the heightened memory capacity of a celibate, there is a story of Rupa Goswami, I believe, but when he wrote his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in those days they didn't have word processors, they didn't even have typewriters, they didn't even have paper or printing presses. They used leaves, papyrus, palm leaves. They would write on the leaves. However, when you write on a leaf or a surface made of bark, and you're writing with ink with a quill, it takes some time to dry. You cannot just turn over and go to the back side and continue writing, because that will smear the front side. So it is said of Rupa Goswami, when he wrote his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, his mind was so sharp and focused and retentive that he would write page 1 without a single mistake. Then he would go to another fresh papyrus leaf, write page 3 without a single mistake. Then the first page would have dried, turn it over, write page number 2, go back, turn over the third page and write page number 4 without any crossouts or scratching or mistakes. So they didn't need word processors in those days because of the retention of semen. The mind was so sharp and so retentive that these kinds of almost supernatural intellectual and literary feats could be performed with great ease. So when one sacrifices for the good of humanity, that is the best service that one can do, not only for us, but for oneself as well. Krishna says, Nacha Tasman Manusheshu Kastid Me Priyati Kamaha. In the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, there is no one more dear to me, nor will there ever be anyone more dear who helps spread the gospel of Krishna consciousness to the fallen, suffering souls in this material world. Last weekend, not this weekend, but the previous weekend, in our main talks in Spanish Fork and Salt Lake City, we talked about the star throwers. An author had been walking along a beach where many, many starfish had been washed up onto the sand by the strong incoming tide, and they were unable to get back in the ocean because the tide kept throwing them back onto the sand. And as the sun rose and it got hotter and hotter, the surface area of the starfish is not made for the drying, heating effect of the sun. It's meant to be in a cool, liquid atmosphere. And so the starfish were literally getting suffocated. They breathed through the various spores, and those spores had been stuck with sand. So the author of the book, The Star Throwers, as he's walking down the beach, and only sort of incidentally noticing all the starfish, some of whom were dead, some of whom were half or dead, comes upon another gentleman who he sees, picks up a starfish and wings it, just like you throw a rock and skip it over a surface of a lake, or a ninja. The ninja have those metal stars or discs like Krishna's chakra, and they're aerodynamically such that you can throw them pretty easily. So this man was picking up the starfish and flipping them as far back out in the ocean as he could. And the author said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm identifying the starfish who are not yet dead, and I'm flipping them as far into the ocean as I can, hopefully beyond the incoming tide, so that they'll have a chance of surviving. I don't know how many of them or if they'll survive, but I'm trying to give them that opportunity." So the author thought that was a good idea, and he joined the man. So two of them are walking down the beach, identifying the starfish which are not yet dead and trying to get them back to their home substantially and far enough away that they don't again return to the beach. And so that's what devotees of the Lord, following the footsteps of Lord Chaitanya and the Goswami, they're like affectionate parents who make all kinds of sacrifices in order to benefit and bless the life of their children. When one does that, when one works to relieve the conditioned souls from suffering, there is no one more dear to Krishna, because Krishna is a star thrower. Krishna appeared. Vairagya Bija Nija Bhakti Yogara Shikshartaveka Parusha Paranam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Sarire Radi Kripambati Ahastramaham Prapadye. I surrender. In fact, Rupa Goswami wrote these verses to Lord Chaitanya. I surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, who, out of compassion for the fallen souls, took on the form of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, descended in Gaudadesh, in Bengal, in order to spread the Sankirtan movement for the benefit of all living beings. So engaged and connected in the service of Krishna, right in the middle of what we were created to do, and fulfilling the purpose, the benevolent purposes of the Lord for this world and its populations, one cannot but be happy. The whole world is a place of happiness, and everything in the world is nothing more or less than the Lord's energies to be used in the Lord's service. This is an incredibly freeing and liberating point of view. I remember when I was a youngster in America in the 60s, things were turbulent, much as they are nowadays. People were divided, much as they are nowadays. And there were a lot of protests against the rank materialism, the denial of Afro-Americans' basic rights, our what we felt was unnecessary meddling halfway across the world in Vietnam. And there were a lot of protest movements. The protests, my own feelings of discomfort and criticism of the status quo took the form of living a very, very simple life. Before I became a devotee, I traveled all over the world. I was in Israel, I was in the Canary Islands, I lived in France, I went to India, I lived in Singapore, I lived in Indonesia, traveled all over the world with never more than like $150 in my pocket. I couldn't see any need for it. I didn't want to be just another consumer. I went to college. I was in a house run by the Episcopalian Church called Koinonia. I remember one evening, a couple of businessmen came to do a seminar to try to inspire us to get into business. And there were about a dozen of us in the house, and we were all good students and higher than average IQ, but I feel kind of sorry when I think about it later. We gave those businessmen such a hard time. You know, how can you just think of yourself? How can you just exploit material nature without making an arrangement for the equal dividing of it among all people? Why isn't that everybody can't claim the blessings of food and water and housing to the equal degree that the Americans? We were full of indignation at the inequities that existed throughout the world. And I might say that if there were inequities in the 60s, they haven't gotten any better now. But if you want to address the situation and do something about it, then just lend yourself to the Sankirtan army of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which begins with chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And once I met devotees in 1970 in Australia, and I realized that everything is God's property. That was so liberating. Instead of thinking in terms of I and mine, and us and theirs, I just started thinking of everything as Krishna. So then all bets were off, all chains were thrown off. Since the time that I realized that everything in the universe is paraphernalia to serve Krishna, I got very greedy. Before I flattered myself that everybody else in the world is greedy, and I'm not greedy. I'm wearing the same pair of jeans. I'm traveling on a few dollars by trains and by buses all over the world, sleeping on it. I'm not greedy. Everyone else is greedy. I'm not greedy. But once I became Krishna conscious, I became greedy, just like everybody else in one sense. But it was greedy to honor Krishna. I was still not greedy. I was still unselfish as far as I was concerned. I didn't need anything. You know, why would I need to get a lot of money? I slept on beaches in Bali. I slept on beaches in Ein Ged, the oasis in Israel, in the Red Sea. I got all the food that I wanted by fruits and vegetables. I couldn't see any reason why I needed to accumulate. But once I became Krishna conscious, I wanted everything in the whole world. I wanted all the money, all the vehicles, all the businesses. I still do, because everything is Krishna's energy, and it should be absorbed it should be utilized in the service of the Lord. And I don't understand some devotees, to be honest with you, just a little something between you and me. You know, they come into some money, they come into some inheritance, they build themselves a big house, they get a motorhome. You know, my pleasure and my Bobby's pleasure has been to give everything to Krishna. It's inconceivable to hold something back. We don't have a medical plan. We don't have retirement money set aside. We don't have a Daisy May or a 401. I don't even know what those are, because we are addicted to using everything that comes under our influence for the service of Krishna. We have 2 temples in Utah. We have a radio station. We have festivals. We have livestock. There's so many different assets that we feel we've reclaimed in the service of Krishna. We've taken ground for the kingdom. And the pleasure of doing that is so much greater than the pleasure of owning something, a house or a motorhome or even a retirement fund. We're just mad after using everything in the service of the Lord. And we can't do anything other than what we're doing. We live in a basement right now. I'm broadcasting to you from a closet. And I'm not in any way regretful. We never had children. And that's our own shortcoming. I'm not bragging about that, because if you can have God-conscious children, and if you can produce another generation of nirmamo nirahankara, devotees who are possessive less and pride, that is the greatest achievement of all. But we never felt we were up to the task of parenting to that level, so we bypassed the process of having children, and just directly, whatever you put in our hands, we will use it to build another temple or improve. It's like so many of you so generously and kindly donated for my birthday fundraiser last week. All that money goes to a billboard on the freeway, to caulking the roof of the outdoor veranda so that the birds don't get in. The whole world is friendly. The whole world reminds us of Krishna, and every single thing that we can identify, that we can name, and that we can focus on, there is a purpose for it in Krishna consciousness. The materialist sees everything as potentially that potentially they can have domination and sovereignty, and then they can exploit everything. But the devotee sees everything as Krishna's property. They want Krishna to have the enjoyment of it, Krishna to be able to, quote unquote, exploit it. That's his right as the creator. If someone uses their own capital to build a factory, and they may employ workers in that factory to produce, let's say, woodwork, let's say cabinetry. So the workers in that factory have a right to a living wage, which will provide them with food and housing and shelter, but they do not have right, the ownership of the manufactured items. They can't take any of those cabinets home. They can't say that, well, because I made this, it's mine. First of all the capital, all the environment, all the tools were provided by the proprietor. The proprietor also quite generously provides for the housing and accommodation of the employees, but where the line is drawn is they do not, because they made the items does not mean they own the items. So in the same way, Krishna is Bhoktaram Yagatapasham Sarvalokamesharam Suridam Sarvagatpamam Shantim Richati. He is the owner and the proprietor of everything, and those who are his devotees are simply seeing everything as Krishna's property and how to engage in his service. Lord Shiva was asked once by Parvati, what's the highest object of worship? And Lord Shiva immediately answered, Vishnu Radhanam Param. There's no question. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satyananda Rishibir Bahudasitam Chandabhya Brahma Sutta Parastava Hitamad Vivinisitam. No, that's not the quote. Brahma Param Brahma Param Dhamma Pavitam Parama Purusham Ahushtam Rishaya Sarve Devashir Asito Devada Swayam Chava Bhavisame. Krishna is the supreme. All the sages like Asito, Devala, Narada proclaim it. Lord Brahma proclaims it. Lord Shiva, proclaims it. Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. So therefore, Vishnu Radhana Param. The highest worship is the worship of Vishnu. But Tajma Paradim Devi Tidiyanam Savacharam. Higher than Lord Vishnu's worship is worship of the paraphernalia. Is worship of the items that can be used in the service of the Lord. And I am one of those items. My wife is one of those items that we use ourselves, our mind, our words, whatever talents and abilities the Lord has given us, and we consecrate those by investing them back and using them in the service of the Lord. And so when one yokes with the Lord through devotional service, which is favorable, then one achieves the pinnacle of the yogic practices. It says, Dhyavashita Sharupena, one's spiritual form, which is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, begins to unfold and to mature from within this material body. There is no impediment, even in this Kali Yuga age, to linking to Krishna through service. Otherwise, there are so many different types of yoga practices, yoga schools, yoga postures, yoga exercise, but ultimately, yoga is something not just to be done 1 or 2 hours a day for good health, but it's to be done 24 hours a day in order to serve the Lord. And yoga is not meant to increase your material facilities, your material sense gratification. Yoga is meant to be done favorable in service of the Lord. And those who are true yogis minimize the bodily bodily needs in order to maximize the time that they spend serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're peaceful, they're happy, they're calm. Even in the midst of the greatest disturbances, they don't get dislodged. They don't get disrupted like 99.9% of the people. Right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Mental disease, drug abuse, suicide is all on the rise. What to speak of the disease itself? We just lost a very, very dear general in Krishna and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's army yesterday. We're remembering the great service of Yasomatinandana Prabhu. We in Utah had a special connection with Yaso because he took a graduate degree in his earlier years from Utah State University. When he would visit America, he would inevitably, and sometimes accompanied by Vasu Ghosh, visit Utah and come to our temple. He would lead kirtans, give lectures. And I was always impressed with what a perfect Vaishnava gentleman he was. When he spoke the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, it was so natural. He'd been raised in a Vaishnava family. It had been part of his whole life. Prabhupada told him he gave up a lucrative career in industry and business to follow Prabhupada. He followed Prabhupada faithfully. Prabhupada gave him 2 instructions. He was from Gujarat, so established temples in Gujarat and translated all of Prabhupada's books into Gujarati. He established about 15 wonderful temples, and he also oversaw the translation of all of Prabhupada's books in Gujarat. So his departure due to COVID is a great loss, but not one devotee anywhere in the world who heard about the departure of Yasomati lost a single step, wasted a single moment in mourning his departure. We celebrate it. His departure was glorious. He dedicated a lifetime of service to Srila Prabhupada. And people who were close to him noted that as his health declined in recent years, he had had a stroke and he had circulatory problems, he had bloating. As his health worsened in the last 4 or 5 years, it seemed like his enthusiasm and his service increased. In inverse proportion to the decline of his health, his enthusiasm to finish the race with panache, with flourish, increased. So there's not a single devotee who heard about the departure of Yasomati who's going to waste a minute in lamenting his loss or in grieving over him. We're not going to lose even a hitch in our step. Just the opposite, due to his shining example of service and dedication, of using as many of the facilities in this material world in the service of the Lord, we up our game the day after the departure of such a great Vaishnava. There may come pandemics. There may be a loss of a near and dear relative. That does not stop the Vaishnavas. They're fixed. They're on their course of serving the Lord. They have a broad-minded vision of doing good to humanity in general. Heard a story one time that in the very, very early years, Prabhupada was, I think, at 26 2nd Avenue, upstairs in his apartment. He got an aerogram. In the old days, there were those aerograms that said India with the lion and the pillars. And Prabhupada was in his room, and they said, Prabhupada, you got an aerogram. They put it on his desk and went out, and the story goes that devotees were peeking. So they'd never seen Prabhupada get an aerogram from India, and so they sort of wanted to see what Prabhupada's reaction was to the aerogram. Prabhupada very neatly cut open the aerogram with a letter opener, unfolded it, very gravely read the contents of the letter, sort of indicated that he'd absorbed it and put it aside and went back to his translating. The devotees just couldn't contain themselves. After some time, after Prabhupada had his lunch, devotee was coming in to clear away his plate, and all the devotee said, so, Prabhupada, you got a letter from India? Yes. Was it good news or bad news? Or was it good news? Prabhupada, would I be too bold if I asked what the news was? Prabhupada, my sister passed away. That's good news, Prabhupada? She was a pure devotee. She went back to Godhead. We have a lot of life members who are extremely dutiful sons and daughters, and inevitably when the parent has a downturn in health, they take leave of absence from their jobs and they fly home to be with their parents, not wanting their parents to pass away alone, children around them. And I'm always full of admiration at the Indian members who are so dutiful and respectful to their parents that they drop everything in order to go back home and be with their parents. And sometimes there's a health scare, and then they'll stay with their parents, and the health scare passes, they'll come back to America, and then a few months later there's another stroke or another turn, and they'll go back, so diligent and so dutiful to their parents. It's just wonderfully impressive. And yet one who is engaged in the service of the Lord does not interrupt one's preaching for such affairs. Once one graduates beyond the limited field of the wife and the children, the extensions of the body, then one does not interrupt or distract oneself for the loss of a loved one. I remember in Australia, when Bhai Bobby and I were first getting involved in Krishna consciousness, her mother had passed away suddenly. Bhai Bobby was very close to her mother. From everything Bhai Bobby's ever told me about her mother, she was a wonderful lady. She passed away. So Bhai Bobby and I were in Australia. We weren't married yet. We had come to Krishna consciousness together as friends. And we were engaged, and there was nothing in Australia. I mean, there was nothing to be attached to. We were living out of a rented house, and we had no money, and we weren't in Dwarka, let's put it that way. We were in Vrindavan. And her father wrote her a letter, please come back, console the family, attend the funeral of your mother, see your sisters. And Bhai Bobby said, I'll do it if you give me a two-way ticket so that I can come back and resume my service. My father didn't want to do that. He said, no, I'll only give you a one-way ticket. Well, Prabhupada did not go back for her mother's funeral. And then her father passed away because he was feeling absent. He also passed away shortly thereafter. And Bhai Bobby did not go back. And if you were in the family circle, that would be censorable. Oh, why didn't you do that? You know, you owe that to your family. Look at all they did for you, and you wouldn't go. But in devotional service, there's a much bigger issue at stake. It is the well-being of mankind in general. And look of what Bhai Bobby was capable. Huge Rath Yatra festivals, decorating Lord Jagannath, building temples. She had a whole army of brahmacharinis that followed her. They said Bhai Bobby was the leader, and whatever Bhai Bobby said, we would do that. So she was much greater service to a greater segment of humanity by just staying fast and not being deviated in what she was doing. And her motive was not disaffection for her father and mother, but an enhanced, enriched, expanded affection for all living beings, not only humans, but animals, reptiles, aquatics, etc., etc., etc. Vidya Vina Sampane Brahmagavi. It's in that same mood the Goswamins gave up the comforts, the support, the consolation of wives and children and family and position and retirement fund and opulence and residence and social status. They gave it all up, just like an affectionate parent will give up eating, sleeping, personal comforts. They'll even give up their life to save the lives of their children. So there are no segment of people anywhere in the creation of the Lord who are more dear to the Lord than those who execute the mission of the Lord, preaching on behalf of the Lord, being the mouthpieces of the Lord, participating in the Sankirtan movement under the guidance of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada, to work for the benefit to bring all souls eventually back to home, back to Godhead. I finish with some verses from a poem, I think it's by Wordsworth, which are somewhat appropriate in this mood of seizing the day and dedicating oneself to the higher cause of God consciousness. The poet said, tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, but the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. From dust thou comest, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow find us further than today. Trust no future, however pleasant, let the dead past bury the dead. Act in the living present, heart within, and God overhead. Art is long, time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb-driven cattle. Be a hero in the lives of great men. All remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother seen shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still pursuing. Learn to wait. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Still with us, Rakesh, Stephen, all the way, all glories to Prabhupada, Sundari Priya, Anjali, TT, Malini Preeti, Gokul, new visitor. Thanks for dropping in on us. Gokul. Let me see who else we've got here. Scrolling on. Sorry for the delay in the beginning. Jimmy and Taruni, by Bobby, Terry. Thank you, Terry. Delighted for each and every one of you who have joined us. We had a delay because normally I go on Zoom, and then through Zoom I go on Facebook Live, and then Facebook Live sort of downloads and prepares, and usually happens within 30 seconds, and then you're broadcasting simultaneous on Zoom and Facebook Live. So and if you go on Facebook Live and you don't go live, it'll cause you to start everything all over again. So I started at 28 minutes past 7, and I did everything I did, and it said Facebook Live preparing. At 7:30, nothing had changed. It said Facebook Live preparing. At 7:32, it said Facebook Live preparing. At that time, I refreshed the screen. Continued, Facebook Live preparing. That time, I went from one internet channel to another internet channel. And our internet here is very good. Facebook Live preparing. So I don't know what's up with Facebook Live today, but it just isn't working. Of course, I'm on Facebook Live from my phone, and without going through Zoom, I was able to exit right away. But it wasn't until 7:38 that I was able to join you. So thank you for your patience. Because we started late, we're ending a little bit later than we normally do. It's 8:25. So I hope it's been worth it to you. I hope that we've shared something that's helped you. Sailing over life's solemn main of forlorn and shipwrecked brothers, seen to take heart again. I know that I take great heart and inspiration, because I wouldn't be able to present myself before you 3 mornings a week and share if I didn't prepare and study and learn myself. So these 3 mornings a week are an excellent opportunity for me to delve deeply into Srila Prabhupada's books and to extract nectar, relish, ras, that then I can share with you, and you can also taste as a result. So thank you very much. We're in partnership here, churning the nectar of Krishna consciousness, and we're particularly happy when someone drops in whose name we don't recognize. We hope that we catch your attention, whet your appetite, and that you'll be back to join us or any other of the great Bhagavatam speakers that are online throughout all of the internet. Thank you very much. Sorry to have been late. We'll do our best tomorrow. If Facebook is still being obstinate, I'll use my phone. One way or another, I will devote every effort to being on time tomorrow at 7:30. And it may be that there's a possibility we may spend a 5th day on this verse. We'll see what Krishna has in mind. Thank you, one and all. Share, join, comment. I will answer all of your comments. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer those questions. Till we meet again, this has been Transcendental Tuesday. Tomorrow will be Wisdom Wednesday at 7:30 Mountain Daylight Time. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. If you didn't chant with me the first time, please join me for our concluding recitation of the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.